Hello students, today we're going to cover our first lecture in Module 1, Week 1. The title of today's lecture is going to be Child and Adolescent Health Across Cultures. By this time for Week 1, so today we're starting our topic with Child and Adolescent Health Across Cultures. We're going to do, this is a quick outline that I use for my face-to-face classes. So after the syllabus discussion, we're going to do our lecture. And after we cover our lecture, I'm going to go over the supplemental reading assignments. Remember that all of the reading assignments, such as journal articles, posted videos, web links, all of those are used in this course for additional information resources and are considered supplemental materials. It is your job to make sure that you expose yourselves to all the content that is covered in those resources, as they are part of your exam and your overall learning experience. Remember that there is no official textbook for this course, so all of the additional learning outside of the lecture occurs through the supplemental resources. They serve a very important purpose in this course overall, and I expect you to be able to read those and learn from those and ask questions through those as well. So let's start today's lecture with a quote. This quote is from Gardner and Kosmitsky, and it talks about the health of the children. It says, "The health of children is one of the world's most important concerns, since the survival of any society rests to some extent on the health of its children." And I believe that is completely true. How we survive in today's society, how we treat our children's or child-related issues today will determine the overall health of our nation and globally speaking for tomorrow. So let's start the lecture with a few definitions, and I'm sure all of you are aware of what these terms really mean, but just to begin the lecture, I would like to officially go over what exactly, what age span these terms cover. So a child would be a young human being below the age of puberty. An adolescent would be a young person in the process of developing from child to adult. And the word adolescent actually originally came from Latin, that meant related to nourish, and later the definition evolved and turned the term into coming to full maturity. That all of the health, what does the term health mean? So the state of being really free from illness and injury, and the origin for this term actually comes from German, and the word means related to the concept of being whole. A few more definitions for you. So what does the term nourish means? It means providing with the food or other substances that are necessary for growth, health, and good condition. And what does the term whole mean? A thing that completes in itself. This one is called collective culture, and the second one is called individualistic culture. Now, what does collective culture basically means? Most commonly, when we talk about cultures, it involves the first type of culture, which is the collective one, belonging to a large group of people that have created, traditions and rituals as a group based on their common belief system, based on their values, their heritage, or environmental factors. And many of them have actually been passed down to them from past generations. So when you talk about collective culture, you're actually emphasizing the importance of the group rather than the individual. You're prioritizing the goals of the group compared to the goals of the individuals. When we talk about individualistic culture, it's exactly what it sounds like. It revolves around the self. The individual and the personal goals are given more importance compared to the goals of the group. And again, it revolves and orients around the self, independent of the group. And if you look at the cultural differences from different eras or from different decades, there is a shift within even in American culture, where we have sort of gone from a collective culture to an individualistic culture, and the importance or the increasing importance of individualistic culture with the time, as the time has passed. Now, what I would like to do in this lecture is there are several cultural variations that I would like to discuss. So previous slide, I actually wanted to ask you, how many of you would be able to or would be comfortable putting a baby to sleep in a separate room? Now let's complete the scenario. So the baby is, let's say, is a newborn, and would you be comfortable putting the child to sleep in a separate bedroom, or do you think it would be a better idea for the child to have the bedroom same as the parent? Up until what age would you consider it to be appropriate for the child to have the same bedroom as the parents? At what age would you feel comfortable separating the bedrooms? And believe it or not, depending on what side of the globe you are, or even what side of the perspective you're on, there are different opinions. Each opinion, backed up by logic and evidence in terms of why certain practice is done. But I want to get your opinion, and if you're interested, you can email me your answers through either D2L or through my SFA, answering this particular question. What would you do? Now let's look at those cultural variations when it comes to sleep or putting a child to sleep. The Western culture believes that an infant should sleep alone in a room, and that is fine. Whereas some of the other groups, such as the native groups like the Mayans or in Mexico or in Central America, view this particular topic or view this particular practice as neglect. In fact, in Japan, children sleep with their parents until they're 6 years old, or in some cases, even until the beginning of puberty. The reason being that there is this opportunity for the parent to bond with their child, and when they separate the child early on in their lives to a separate bedroom, that particular opportunity is compromised. Sleep actually is one of the behaviors or habits that receives a lot of variation from different cultures across the globe. And like I said, the Western culture views infant sleeping alone positively because it provides more privacy for the parents and nurtures the practice of being independent for the child leading into their adulthood. In order to make it practical, we have many modern day devices, right? Including, our audio and video baby monitors and etc. However, not all cultures view this infant sleeping routine, of course, independently positive way. For instance, like I said, some of the examples over here, the native cultures or, some of the Asian cultures view it as a neglect, and there's a reasoning for that, the levels of attachments are affected, and the bonding level between the child and either of the parents, specifically the mother, are compromised. Now let's look at another particular cultural variation, and this is younger children attending preschool and daycares in families where both parents work. A little bit of history. So post-war, there were definitely a lot of cultural changes in child rearing and upbringing. The provision of daycare for preschool children kind of became the norm in the West when the labor market required women to enter the workforce. So the culture changed as the economic and the political pressures were focused on female employment. So by 21st century, proper daycare and preschools were established to support the network of parents where mothers and fathers were both employed. However, even today, we have two differing, perspectives on children attending daycare and preschools and children not attending daycares and preschools. And depending, again, and we're not even going to look at globally, even within the United States, we have, different opinions of parents who think it's a good idea for children to sort of venture out socially and meet other children and go into those settings, social plays, interaction, engagement with peers of their own age, and also being under supervision of other adults and learning in those aspects. Whereas, there's another side to it where other adults think that it would be better for the child to spend those early years of their life with their parents, but primarily with their mother, and deepening that bonding level. So, both sides have their own logics. I'm not saying that either side is correct or wrong, but just being aware of those cultural variations and those different practices and what are some of the logics behind those practices. Now, the traditional age of marriage is also another practice that sees a lot of variation. For example, marriage during the teenage years. Now, these are traditional ages. That does not mean that they're popular ages. So, for example, it says traditional age of marriage in Europe is 16. By no means does it mean that it's a popular age for marriage. Now, in the Western context, this may be seen as, abusive, exploitative act because there's evidence that early marriage leads to earlier childbirth, which impacts on the health of the females. So in the West, when we look at, early marriages, something that is even before 16, within those ages, it is viewed sometimes in a negative context because there is a possibility where the individual may have been exploited or abused into, that relationship. Whereas the non-Western view of early marriage actually differs quite a lot. It is usually seen as bringing families together or kinship closer together. So the practice of early and arranged marriage has for decades, for a very, very long time. And it's been practiced as a way to bring families together, kinships closer together, and basically to make sure there's a continuance of the tribe, the clan, the group. The good news is that the age for marriage has increased in both east and the west parts of the world. As time passes, there's more awareness about female reproductive health issues and how they're related to early marriage. And as that awareness spreads, the age of marriage is increasing. The typical age for women to get married is 30. And that differs quite a lot when we look at other when we look at other developed or industrial nations within Europe or North America. So you see a different pattern everywhere, and you're able to see the logic that is backed up behind that particular practice. And it's very interesting to see how even within one world we have so many different opinions regarding one particular practice, and that's marriage. And then another cultural variation that I would like to include in this lecture is about transitioning from child to adult. Now, that is seen in different ways in different parts of the world, but an example that I would like to give you, or through a term rather, is called rites of passage. And that term specifically means a symbolic change that occurs when someone transitions from being a child to an adult. Now, in some cultures, in some tribes, that could be through migration for work, through body art or adornment. In U.S., we celebrate that rite of passage through bar mitzvahs or quinceañeras, and mostly it's cultural limbo where 12 to 20-year-olds may not be considered adults, right? But then there are certain milestones with which we celebrate that individual transitioning from a younger age to an older age. So, at the age of 16, you're getting your driver's license. Now, that's a milestone that you're no longer a child. You can drive a vehicle. So you're an adult. At the age of 18, when you're able to vote, now you're no longer a child or a teenager, you're an adult. Or when you are able to consume alcohol at the age of 21, you're no longer a teenager, you are now consuming alcohol or legally able to consume alcohol, so you should be even more careful. At the age of 25, when you get that first big job, so forth and so on. You see how that continues, the transitioning from child to adult, or necessarily, from a younger age to an older age. And those milestones within our culture in the United States look like this, but they could look completely different and still be celebrated in the same way in other parts of the cultures. And those examples, like I gave you, are, for example, migration for other things, and etc. Now, the concept of family is something that I also wanted to discuss as my last example for cultural variation. And this is a very interesting topic because the concept of family actually differs quite a bit as well. And when we look at different parts of the world, specifically in Western versus non-Western cultures. So when we talk about family within the Western cultures, it's defined specifically through blood relations. And it's basically obliged to where, blood relatives, aunts and uncles, are obliged to care for a child in a moral and a financial way. In non-Western cultures, specifically in the Eastern cultures or South Asian cultures, African cultures, the concept of family is a lot bigger and broader than blood relations. How so? Well, it includes kinship, extended family networks, close family friends, relative neighbors, extended relatives and things like that. So the concept of family is a lot broader compared to a close concept of family, which is very nuclear, very defined within the Western cultures. And I think that's very interesting because when it comes to caring for an orphan, as far as the moral responsibilities and the financial obligations, those are also divided the same way, where a neighbor who may have been very close to a family would be able to take on a child just like a blood relative would have been in that case, because they have been that close to the family and have had that bond developed, and would be able to raise the child in that way. So it's very interesting to see how even the concept of a nuclear family or just family differs in different aspects in different parts of the world. Another concept that I wanted to cover in today's lecture is ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism basically comes from this belief that one's own culture, way of behaving or practicing is the correct way, and that all other practices are then judged in that context and by that standard. And although it seems like a very negative way of doing things, right? now that I'm reading it to you, you would think that, oh no, I would never engage in such kind of a practice. It's actually very common. And ethnocentrism is usually, when we talk about the word, it generally legitimates a Western gaze and conceals the indigenous response. We see it happening a lot in a lot of the Asian, African, the non-Western parts of the world. So an example that I would like to give you is the care of the HIV orphans of the sub-Saharan. Now, let me expand a little bit further on that particular example. As far as ethnocentrism is concerned, the Western interpretation of the care of the HIV orphans is to give them institutionalized care, whereas the indigenous solution for this issue is to utilize the extended family and kinship network to provide that care, including aunts and uncles, grandparents, non-blood related close family friends. So from a non-Western culture with traditional practices in childcare, institutionalized care seems very just out there kind of option. It's an ethnocentric response essentially, and it's deeply flawed because it disrupts the customs and practice of the indigenous community. So that particular example, the HIV or the care for the HIV orphans in the sub-Saharan and how that's dealt with, and the Western response to it is the practice of ethnocentrism. I expect you to be able to explain this term. I expect you to be able to give me the example and tell me what exactly does it mean. The child worker issue is another example of ethnocentrism where international agencies and institutions are at this forefront of the activity to remove children from the workplace. And there is I understand that. I understand where it comes from, because children should not be in the workplace. They belong, they belong in academic institutions. They belong in schools. That's where they should be. That's where their childhood should be spent. However, that particular situation doesn't really fit well in all other parts of the world, where children may not have the same access to education or may not have the same learning opportunities. So they are working to reduce poverty in their household. They're working towards their education. They're basically utilizing the funds that they get from their job or from their work to be able to get an education. So the benefits definitely are that it reduces poverty and the children feel pride at being able to making a contribution at their family, and then the work pays for their education. But if the ethnocentric response would be to basically go into a ethnic community in a non-Western part of the world and taking children who are employed and taking them all out of the workplace and putting them into schools, and at one place where it would be great because all the children are in schools and institutions getting an education, the bad part would be thinking about questions such as how are they going to be able to afford it in the long term, what will happen to their family's overall income level and the amount that they contributed, who is going to be responsible for that. So there's different things to think about when we implement a solution on a public health level, on a broader level, and ethnocentrism definitely plays a part in implementing solutions internationally. And so this literally concludes our lecture for this week, or for today, and then take the exam. You will have your health planning document group assignments and topics that will be posted to you today. Students are assigned into groups by me, and the topics are also assigned by me, so you'll have a topic and you'll have group members to work with. Recommend is that you go ahead and get in contact with your group members through you have D2L email addresses. You can use that. You can use their MySFA email address or their names and initiate contact. Be proactive. Try to work, there's literally no time to waste here. There's no time to procrastinate. So if you do delay this, it will cost you your grade. Health planning document is a very big component of this course, and it weighs a lot of points, so you don't want to compromise that. So make sure to start early, make sure you're proactive, make sure you ask questions, and that you do refer to the health planning module that's been posted on D2L. Let me pull that up real quick. The health planning document module that is posted right here. And you're referring to that. So everything related to the health planning module has been posted here, so that you refer to that and make sure that you are looking at the examples and the rubrics that are also posted within this module. And then again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask